Alright, so welcome to my first tutorial on C++ basics. Here we're going to be discussing variables and hold up, variables. Variables, word alert, variables. What are variables? Variables are basically just the containers or you can think of it as like a storage space. So if we need to store something in computer memory, we refer to that word as variables. Any word or number can act as a variable. For example, here on the C++ website, they have a list of variables. Uh, and some things here to remember is that variables they define a data type. Okay, so for instance, we have character types. So character types, they just give you some notes on the precision that they carry. But the basic thing to remember is that character types is basically just a character, a single character, A, E. So that's the only thing it holds. Integer is just a number. It cannot be a double number like zero point 0.0. It cannot be a dollar amount. Some things to keep in mind that it cannot be a float. Float is nothing. Float is down here. A float is basically a precision type number. Um, Things after the decimal point. And then we have booleans, which is it just basically returns either true or false. We also have variables for void types and null pointers. But that's a little advanced. We're just going to basically only be talking about the basics. Another thing to remember is that variables are limited from predefined words. And predefined words, what are those? Predefined words in C++ is basically a list of keywords that has been set aside so that when we use them, there would be no conflict in uh, information between the program. So there are quite a few words that we cannot assign variables. And these are some, you can take a look at these, but you can't use char. If your char is a variable type, but you can't say char. And I'll explain that in a second. Some of the most common ones that you may see is class. You can't have that as a variable in a for loop. You can't have that because it's assigned for for loops. Doubles is another one. Do is another type of loop. Else is within a loop as well. Again, these are more into loops. I'm just giving you a little bit idea of some of the things that you cannot define as variables. And you can take a look at these, and there are quite a few. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to see some examples of how to define variables. Okay, so we're gonna just go ahead and define variables. And what I did is we do have to always start off with using namespace std. Definitely not the kind we can track, but this is standard. So what we would do here is we're gonna go ahead and start off with the int keyword. And int is just an integer. So we're gonna say integer uh, keyword is int. Okay, so always remember that whenever you want to start an integer, and that is basically a number, like i.e. 1, 5, 200, etc. It has to be whole numbers only. Okay, so that's something important to remember. So once we want to define an integer, and the reason we probably want to even start off defining integers is because they hold numbers, whole numbers. So it allows us to deal with whole numbers. So that's what we're basically going to learn here. So we start off by saying int, and as you notice, it lights up green because that's a keyword. So anything that basically lights up a different color, depending on what settings you have for your program, you're gonna notice that those are predefined words. And so what we'll have is int. And whenever we do a int, we can either follow it by either a letter or either a whole word. So it doesn't matter what we're gonna reserve for that. It's still gonna want just a whole number. So we can say code, for instance, okay, and we can say that code, we want it to hold a whole number like 20. And we use the semicolon, of course, to close it off. So looking at this, we have a reserved keyword, int, integer. We have code. I want code to hold 20. So when we go to our next line and we want to use this somehow, first let's just show that we can actually get the compiler to return 20 by calling cout, which is basically going to return this to the console. It's going to just tell this is what I want you to show the user. So we cout by using those two brackets there. And then we just call what we want, which we want to see out code. We want to display code. Code is 20. So what it's going to display is when we go ahead and compile and run, and we notice here that it did give us 20. So that's one way of doing it. We'll leave that there for you to view. So another way we can define integers here is if we want to do arithmetic. The basic arithmetic, we're going to use that as an example. So what we could do here is we can say int, and we're going to assign it a. Remember, there's not important on what we use. We can definitely say, number, for instance, just to let you know. So if we want to give number 20, and then we definitely have to correct that. And then we also want a number. We could just say number 2, and we want to give number 2 uh, 20. We want to say 2. Okay. So we want to perform some basic arithmetic here. So what we would do is we would say int because that's what we want it to return, a whole number. And we can call it, we want a sum. So we want it to add those two numbers. And we want to do 20 plus 2, but we don't want to have to say 20 plus 2 each time, because what happens is by defining these up here, you can just come up here one time and change it, and later on in the code, you wouldn't have to worry about something else, depending on where you're using it in the code. And that's a little more advanced. But for now, let's just understand the concept of using variables. So we have a sum, and we want to define it. We want to add it. So let's say number plus number 2. And we go ahead and close that off. Now we need to have that again viewed to the console us. So we'll say cout, and we want to see out the sum. This is the sum. We want the sum of number 1 and number 2. Once we hit run, compile and run, it's going to give us 22, which is expected. So as you can see, we can do different type of ways. You can kind of work with that, rearrange it, and do other little things as well. But that's the basics of variables and how they work. Very simple. Just remember those key concepts. Now also remember that there are other variables that we can use as far as doubles, floats. But for now, we're just going to talk about integers. We'll get more into the other type variables in another video. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.